Hello, everyone. It's Dan King here with Fireside Strategic, here with another Better Mental Health interview. And it's my pleasure today to be joined by Bruce Campbell. On this show, we interview therapists and practice owners, in many cases, people who have lots of experience in the field, and we want to share insights that practice owners can use to grow their practices. Here at Fireside, we're focused on growing mental health practices. We believe that it's high time for the industry to shift from scarcity to abundance. We're at a place where we think there's a real opportunity for therapy practices to grow, both financially, but also how they serve clients and patients in this vitally, vitally important time. So, all that said, it's my pleasure to welcome Bruce Campbell, licensed clinical social worker, therapist, to the show. Bruce, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So I would love to hear what got you into the field in the first place. How did things begin?
I sometimes joke that, if a kid, you ask a kid what they'd like to be when they grow up, often they'll say things like a fireman or a policeman. They see those things. To me, I saw a therapist. When I was a kid, I had a few experiences, very significant experiences with therapists, and it sparked my interest. So I took a long and winding path, which included doing psychology at McGill University, but not going forward to be a psychologist. Then I spent a few years doing other things, and then returned, got a master's in social work, taught for a few years as a social worker, and practiced in clinics in several different aspects of the profession, and ended up being clinical supervisor and management of clinics. So I have kind of a range of experiences. And then fairly near the start of the pandemic, I decided to go full-time independent.
Okay. Is this the first time in your career that you've done that, or at other points have you been full-time independent?
No, it's the first time.
Okay. The first time after...
The first time as a therapist. Sure.
Okay, right. Okay. The first time after 40 years of being a licensed clinical social worker?
20 years as a licensed clinical.
Okay, 20 years. Fantastic. And why did you make that decision?
20 years as a social worker. Licenses, and they take years to develop and change.
Yes, they do. So I'm curious then, having these wide range of experiences, why did you make this choice?
Which choice is that?
So the choice to become independent.
Well, at a certain point, I'm not going to say it's the Peter principle, if you remember the Peter principle, that a person rises to their level of incompetence. But in a sense, you are put in a position where so much of my job as a manager and supervisor in the clinic did not involve direct patient work. So, obviously you're responsible no longer for 20 or 30 patients, but you're responsible for 400 patients on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's just a lot of internal politics, inertias in agencies and clinics. And I think that's perhaps relevant to people who are developing independent practices of multiple people. It's the old principle of anyway, the Peter principle would say that you rise to the level at which you're, in a sense, uncomfortable with what's going on. And so the decision, and I will say that it's pretty funny that when the week before the pandemic started in New York, I was negotiating office space for an independent practice, and with the intention of being gone in about 2 months. And I stuck around, mostly just to help the transition from, for remote services, teletherapy.
Right.
None of my staff had any experience with that, and so we had to develop a lot of software and fix hardware. We were actually pretty good. I will say that the therapists all were literally within 3 days of the closing down the city, were providing services online.
Yeah.
There was almost zero lag.
That is a fantastic.
And then at a certain point, I said, "Well, now my plan. I'm executing the plan I intended 4 months ago to be, and then went independent."
I would love to hear. It's interesting you mentioned teletherapy. One of the things I'm excited to talk to you about today is some of the bigger trends that are shifting the way psychotherapy is done and delivered. And I'm curious how you think about teletherapy. Is it almost as effective as the in-person thing? I'm curious as to your thoughts on effectiveness and broader benefits and drawbacks of teletherapy.
It's a different thing. Before the pandemic, I had thought about it, and I guess we were developing some forms of telehealth. But for example, because I was working in the New York State mental health Office of Mental Health, which was the state agency responsible for this, and the insurance companies, and this was always an issue that nobody really wanted to address effectively. And so what happened back then, I'm talking March of 2020, was that all the rules were broken, in a sense. They were just said, well, I know we had all these rules, we had all these protocols, things that, let's just get rid of them. Let's ease the ramp here for people to get therapy, because the other was dangerous. It was considered dangerous. Because of my age, I'm in a fairly high-risk group at that time, so there was no real effective way for me to provide therapy safely.
Right.
And that was true for a number of my colleagues. So, that was part of what we were faced with. And when those barriers came down, everybody scrambled to start doing it. I don't mind it. I will say this. There's something about an in-person practice that still, and I've had a few sessions face-to-face with people, but there's something about the physical presence that's very important to therapy. So I will say, though, that it's the convenience for people, especially, I suspect, many people, all people, the convenience of not having to leave their office at an inconvenient time during the middle of the day, travel 30 minutes by car or subway or bus to sit in their therapist's office for 45 minutes and then do the reverse, all of which led to people to try to get evening sessions, but there's only so many evening sessions or early morning sessions that we can provide. So
yes,
I think the ability in some ways especially when people were working at home, to just almost like shut off their boss and turn on their therapist was quite magic change. So
there's no question there's huge...
Absolutely.
You are? Okay, interesting. Yeah, there's no question there's huge convenience benefits, particularly as we have such a labor shortage, right? So there just isn't enough therapist, man-woman power available, right, to see clients given how much demand there is. So it does make things a little more efficient. But I'm curious about maybe some of the other benefits and drawbacks you see. So beyond convenience, are there certain, and I'm curious also if there's certain types of therapy or certain types of work that you feel lend themselves a little less to teletherapy? Work with the seriously mentally ill. In other words, again, this is a very broad field. We go from the what we might call the worried well to the very seriously impaired, and that's whether you're talking the various psychotic disorders, which can include bipolar disorder, down to autistic disorders, autism spectrum disorders. There are a range of, and to be honest, suicidal clients. You just, in some way, the situations are much trickier for those. Yeah. Plus which, there are still pockets of people, socioeconomically, who need to be served, who don't necessarily have access to
And I had this come up several times when I was working in the clinic with telehealth, to privacy, availability. I mean, domestic abuse clients, they may not actually have the ability to connect with a therapist or other services in a safe way through telehealth. So there is still a real need in some way for that. So, I mean, I think that kind of a blend is really what we're going to be blessed with in the future. In terms of, manpower, that's always a tricky one. And that gets into the issues of multi-provider practices, too. So...
Tell me a bit more about your thinking there. Tell me a bit more about multi-provider practices and why that came up for you here.
Well, there's certain realities. Therapists have complex lives, and certainly when running a clinic, we often found, that's your biggest asset is the staff. Absolutely. And I was like I said, clinical supervisor, in which case the people were not employed by me, but I was responsible for them. And, we will have people with illnesses, therapists with illness, therapists who have life events, deaths of spouses, parents, births of pregnancies, children, child health care. A lot of these things that go on that... Well, for example, they'll give the case like childcare. Especially the pandemic showed us that this is not. It's a cobbled together solution for many therapists, and they may have a partner or not. So now, when the therapist is trying to provide services from home, for example, and the children have care, then it's just complicated.
Yeah.
People have lives outside of their work, and so the ability to actually provide them with more flexibility can be handy. Again, same thing. Therapists may live in one place and work in another place. They have to do the commute. There's a lot of assumptions about.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not just a 9 to 7 or 10 to 6 a job. It involves all those aspects of life.
Yeah. Given the
impact on the effectiveness of therapy, therapists to provide services.
Absolutely. They live absolutely complex lives, and they need to serve themselves as well as others. And so having access to this new tool, it sounds like overall, yes, it can be misused, but it's a net benefit in the end. So did you want to add to that picture?
No, that's it. Just as a point of view as a supervisor, I'm not sure, different ranges of what people consider as a supervisor. I'm pretty much a very clinical supervisor, which is my primary concerns are the care provided to the patients of my staff, but also for my staff's well-being. As an employer, as a manager. So, it's always just to make sure that they're bearing up under that, anyway, that's the whole issue of staff productivity, I guess, that they're taking care of themselves, but
yes.
Anyway, that is also an issue when I am not actually in the room with them. And because I'm doing this in a sense when we're doing teletherapy and telesupervision, I'm here and they're there. I again have to be able to judge if something's going on, and so I think we may be moving toward a more blended model, which would be nice. I actually had one staff member who was headed for Vermont at the beginning of the pandemic, and for a good part of that first year actually provided his services from Vermont. So there was no way to actually meet him in person. and maybe that's a distributed model that that can continue. But I would like to see people in person at least once in a while.
Yeah.
Actually, interestingly, a colleague and friend of mine, she worked for many years as a professor and then as a director of a program training PhD psychologists, clinical psychologists, remotely, and they had a pretty. I think that I would say that their program, just had a long history of being able to train people. And I think they've used that same blended model where you mostly did probably by phone at one point and then by video, and eventually you meet up some number of times a year, whether in Chicago or New York or other part of the country. And it's been I think a very successful training program. Though, who knows if the powers that be in the greater licensing area always had a little bit of until the pandemic came, thoughts about it.
Yes. I wonder also, though, if there's implications where if your training takes place in a partly or mostly remote way, how does that affect your abilities and skills and tendencies to actually deliver, right?
That's a good question. One of the things I've been for a number of years is teacher. I taught. I was a classroom lecturer in social work, and that was great. 3-hour lectures. And subsequently, I was a training supervisor. So in social work, as in most other medical or medically related professions, you have interns. An intern comes in, and you have to kind of, and mostly I would say second year interns. It's usually 2 internships. The second year interns, and we'd have to kind of introduce them to the clinic and the processes and things. And I will say that during that first pandemic year was also the first time in which the intern had to go, and I had to deal with the intern this way too. So, so that is a training thing, and so you're not. There are a lot of techniques in terms of body language that you can't really demonstrate on video. But if they're mostly training for video, then But if then they're put out into another setting, they may have to get some more training. And of course, I'm all in favor of continuing education training for those things.
Absolutely.
Which actually brings up an interesting topic. And maybe it's a little, but it's something I did want to mention here.
Sure.
It's for multiple therapist practices.
Mm-hmm.
Group therapy has I've had a lot of struggle in the last dozen years with I was trained as a group therapist. I started as a group therapist. Most of my work was as a group therapist. When I did some changes to the more mental health side things, I found that a lot of clinics were just not doing group therapy, and it's a struggle, and it was a struggle for therapists to. I would run successful groups. I would run groups for young men, their late teens, early 20s. I would run groups for older men. I would run other kinds of groups. But sustaining group was always an issue, and yet I think it is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to deliver, and not because you're not doing one-to-one in front of an audience. It's not. It's an actual group process.
Yeah.
And that's where the technology. I've done couples on screen, which is where they're each in different rooms. I've done couples where they're in the same room, and so I can see the potential, but it's kind of an interesting. I'd like to see more of that done. I think clinics should be doing much more group work than they're doing. I think it has a lot of benefits it's for a lot of different conditions.
Why do you think they're not doing more? I mean, demand is off the charts at the moment, right? So that could also be one way to potentially move the needle a little bit there. Like, why do you think it is that they're not doing more?
Well, sometimes it's because, I will say in some cases it's because of inertia. Because in terms of clinic, it's tricky. I mean, you have to kind of assemble a group, and then you have to work very hard with skills that you may not have been really supervised for.
Yes.
Given. In other
Yes.
words, if you've had a supervisor who didn't do group work, they're not going to tell you how to do group work. If you haven't had the opportunity to, I will say that when I was in social work school, we did group training, and the first thing that the professor said was, "Well, okay, we're going to have a group project." Well, at that point, you could have heard like this massive groan go through the room. Oh no! And that was a functioning group project, and nobody liked being. They always remember like some group in college or
totally
high school that just totally fell apart. And I will say even in that there were some notable failures in that training. Luckily, my group is very smooth running, as you'd hope, but. Again, I think there's some inertia. There's a lot of anxiety about it. There's a lot of and a lot of it's the group dynamic. So that, again, it's really to like, it's almost technical. I mean, therapists are worried that the group will attack them or gang up on them. So they attempt to maintain this iron control over things. Like let's not get it too. Let's not get this group going too far because they just don't respect the dynamic of the group. But it's actually economically it actually makes some sense. I mean, I just checked my insurance rates for a group and I don't run groups right now. Group and individual, and effectively once you get 3 people in a group, you're actually that hour you're actually being paid more.
Right.
And then, if you get a group of 5 or 6, which is a fairly good size for a group, then you're doing very well for that hour. So, I encourage it to be, like I said, encourage clinics to look into it and get people the right training, give them the right technologies, and try it.
It's a great suggestion, and maybe. Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
Well, I was going to say one other thing, which is, and then again, my intuition on this. And again, as a technologist in some sense, and as a therapist, that the flattening of this like Hollywood Squares kind of thing that we do with the panels, actually is great for group dynamics because it makes me as the leader one of the faces. And one of the old problems in group, and I've experienced it many times, is that the patients turn to the therapist or the group leader and start to, and the group leader has to kind of go, please talk to him. It's like, they'll say, well, Jim was saying, and say, don't tell Jim, don't tell Bruce. I mean, Bruce is like, so this, like I said, that Hollywood Squares thing does allow you perhaps to get a much more effective group going.
It's a really interesting idea, and maybe just one quick little personal reflection. So I'm not a therapist, but I am an executive coach, and I remember when I was studying, when I was in a master's in sort of organizational psychology, we did a group study. We did a group dynamics workshop. And I have to say, as someone that was trained one-on-one, that is an only child who has delivered, most coaching I've done one-on-one, groups were terrifying to me. It was a real growth edge. I see enormous potential in the group, but I can absolutely see how so many practitioners, especially if they're really used to one-on-one, I mean, inertia is one way to put it, but I think you're right. Fear is absolutely a part of the equation. But there is such a power in groups if channeled and harnessed skillfully.
Right. And as you said, fear is an interesting, I mean, fear is the emotion that's the barrier, but it's also, in some sense, if you can flip it around, it's some of the driver of the group dynamic, because it's just an emotion like any other emotion, and you can just, it subtly twists when there becomes, like, you know, like you said, like you said, you're an only child, but in families, you know, there are power relations that can be reconfigured in a group. Yes, it can be very powerful, and the one-on-one, you can. I mean, I think a lot of therapists. I'm going to say that some of the negative aspects of being a therapist are you can kind of let things kind of slide for a long time with a client as the client's repeating and returning to and kind of like just, you know, let it kind of go on autopilot. I mean, there is that old model of the therapist who doesn't really talk to the the client. I had a number of cases in life where I was not the first therapist, but the second or third therapist, and well, I didn't like that therapist. All she did was sit and look at me. Well, that's not going to be my style.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Anyway, well, super interesting comment, and yes, I think group. You know, it's interesting. We talk about group practice owners. I use that phrase, but here we talk about doing therapy for multiple people simultaneously. Right. Group practices, you're right, in my experience, do not do group work. Funnily enough, and I think that's absolutely, like, not only an opportunity, but if we want to start to make headway in demand, in addressing how much demand there is, which is something I definitely want to talk to you about, then this could be a potentially unexplored avenue.
Right, and the thing is that I think what's well, I'm not going to say it's unstudied, because it's been a while since I was actually doing studying of group work. Is that you know, in fact, one of the things the conclusions I come to after years of running clinics was that it would be a good model to actually have groups that were almost preparatory for individual therapy. In other words, people come in and it's like very pressured, you know, I need a therapist, I need therapy. And you say, well, like, why don't we get you into this group, which is not going to hurt you, might help you. Some fair number of people, that's all they need. But then you're actually interacting with a therapist who can assess. So it's like, even if it's several months of assessment, maybe triaging and saying, oh, okay, well, you know, you really could use an individual therapist. Let's queue you up for that intake process. So you have an intake that assesses, and, you know, obviously you want to. I mean, some of the exclusions for a group are psychosis, unless you have a early psychosis group, for example, teenagers or young people who've had a first break. But, you know, you want them to you sort of get a sense that they, and it can open them up about disclosing and some things that would get them more ready for therapy, because, you know, some people go into therapy and will literally not tell their therapist stuff, you know. I mean, I have many stories.
Oh yes.
These people just go in and they'll be going for a year or 2 years, and then suddenly something will slip out, and it's like, did you just tell me? And then they say, oh, well, I didn't know that. I should have told you that. It's like, okay, well, we did 2 years of good work, but now we have to start back up. We have to roll back a little bit and go at that. Right.
Really interesting insights. I want to go back just a little bit to this demand issue and kind of get a bit of a sense of historical perspective from you. So we're in this stage where publications speak of how vast the demand is at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Curious to get a little perspective from you on, is it truly as a result of the pandemic and the moment where we are, considerably greater than it ever has been? Or is that overhyped a little bit? I'm curious if you could speak to what you've seen through your expertise and experience.
I think, like I said, I've been, I was going to say, on and off therapy patient for almost 60 years, to some extent.
Yeah.
In various times in my life that I've sought it, more near the beginning, less in recent years. As I'm an existential therapist, so I partly it's that as life roles change, I feel that therapy is something that you can do. This isn't. Freud even wrote about this near the end of his life when he wrote an article called "Analysis Terminable and Interminable." And he realized that he thought, analysis, they called it was one and done. You did an analysis and that was it. You go forth and live the rest of your life. But he discovered that people were returning. And he thought, I thought we did that. But, of course now we know that it is, like I said, it is life is a series of transitions. And I think that therapies can be, I'd say, therapies should be as long as they need to be. Sometimes, as I said earlier, dynamics of therapists can be, and this could be an issue that has to be watched in any practice.
Yes.
Are we providing cocktails to the person after in other words, we did the therapy, and now we're just kind of like, well, we got the client. It's easier to keep the client, like a cable television provider, than to get a new client. Let's just keep the client. And I'm not a big believer in the 5-10 session therapies. I'm much more of the classic old school in some ways. Like it's going to take some time. And if it isn't me, it should be another therapist. In other words, maybe we'll do this for a couple of years, and you will decide you want to seek something else, or maybe like group or family counseling. And there's only so much therapy one can do in a week. But I think that so I think that there's some work to be done on testing. There's some really interesting work by, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now, but work on progress. Now, how you measure progress. And maybe we kind of go, well, let's measure progress. Let's actually say, on a scale of 0 to 100, are you at a 50 or are you at a 75? And if you're at 75, can you work with maybe once a month therapy or just periodic check-ins? In other words, making the patterns of therapy a little bit more creative. Just say, well, come every week, and then eventually maybe come every 2 weeks. And I think that there's a lot of that can be also achieved. It is kind of a cafeteria style. In some ways, but it's a negotiation between the therapist and the client.
Right.
Again, back to the teletherapy. That's also one of the advantages of telehealth, is that effectively if a person is, and again, corporations probably have to help by giving us private spaces in the corporate office. If people are going back to the office, you have a private room that you can go in and do your, mental health as well as your physical health. Book that room, and you're kind of soundproof and visually opaque environments to do your sessions. I think that could be helped. So,
Absolutely. A lot of possibilities there. I'm curious how you would situate this moment historically in terms of kind of quantity of demand. Do you think that we have way more than is the norm? What have you seen over the course of your years?
I think, I think that we don't have enough therapy. We don't have enough therapists.
Right.
I know that in England they had a royal commission or government commission, and they studied it. One of the things they proposed was training lay therapists to provide like 10 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy as a kind of almost a Band-Aid solution. I mean,
yep.
with a certain, just because there was so much depression, so much alcohol use, substance use, they really wanted to, and I'm not sure what the status of that whole thing is now, or there's papers I'd have to read up on that, but I think there is an increasing demand. I think there's increasing demand because I think there's an increasing acceptance. There's been a number of pretty interesting therapists on television and the movies that, and I think also it's one of these things like the more therapy that's been done, the more likely it is that somebody in your family or friend group has had a therapist and normalizes it to you.
Yes.
And like when you're saying, oh no, I'm feeling really bad, and say, well, hey, maybe I was really helped by a therapist. Maybe you should get a therapist. And that normalizes something that used to be when I was growing up. Because remember, I spanned many decades here. Was very I perhaps was lucky that I was living in New York. That's why I had more access to therapy, because in this neighborhood, actually where I live, used to be where all the therapists were. In fact, the clinic I went to was 3 blocks away from where I live now. So it's much more accepted. So therefore, it gets more demand because there's no less trauma or no less stress.
Yes.
Although maybe there is more stress, certainly more stress. If anything, society is more stressful. But there's also more acceptance. I mean, then the other side is, how do we get therapists paid more?
Absolutely, yes.
Because one thing mental health professionals don't have that, well, for example, I'm not a psychiatrist, I used to manage psychiatrists, but the classic problem there is essentially, well, like with therapists, we have one code, we have one code. I mean, it's 90834, say, to insurance companies. So, that's it. It's like, that's a time-based code. Like, you give us 45 minutes, which is a little range number, but 45 minutes, and we'll pay you for 45 minutes, and that's it. You can't, and it's very hard to kind of go, this particular person needs more. It's not like a medical doctor may do 3 or 4 procedures in a session and get paid, for those.
Yes.
But we're time-based. Psychiatrists and social workers and psychologists, we have that like sort of single code that makes our lives difficult sometimes.
I can imagine. Yes. The
like
connection, but time and money is when they're deeply connected. There are a lot of consequences to that.
Right. And it isn't. And it isn't. There's a classic story that Irvin Yalom tells of a man coming to him and saying, my son has this problem. I really want it solved. I want the best that he can, and I'm willing to pay more than your normal rate. It's like,
right.
Well, why would you pay more than my normal rate? I mean, you think that I have a special drawer here with special therapies that we only give to people that pay the good money. Okay.
Well, and I'm totally aligned with everything you said there. I think this problem of paying therapists more is, as something that we're a problem that we're actively looking to solve. And I think as much as it can be tricky sometimes to measure results, I think those that can afford to pay more are going to be more invested in the journey and there's a lot of change required to make major shifts in your life. There's a lot of often effort required. As you say, your belief is that effective therapy often takes a while. And so, if you pay a little bit more, in my view, you're probably more likely to be committed to that journey for the longer term.
Yeah, well, certainly as soon as you separate from, it depends on who's paying. Always.
Mm-hmm. This too.
Yes.
This too. Yeah.
If the individual is paying, and should be paying, and you have the if the clinic, if the group is providing a good set of services, it isn't just like you show up and then you go home, but in fact has additional credentials, specialties, maybe add-on services.
Yes.
You definitely can change the profit picture, the income picture. Let's not say profit. Profit is a dirty word, but income picture for everything.
I don't know if profit needs to be a dirty. It is in some cases. I don't know that it needs to be.
No, I was making a little joke because that is in fact one of the in these helping professions.
Yes.
It's the secret, in a sense.
Yeah.
But it is important that practitioners need to eat too.
Couldn't agree more. Bruce, as we move towards the end of our time together, really, really grateful for these ideas, and I think there's a lot here for practice owners to think about, perhaps a lot that they may not have considered. Curious if there's any other insights, anything else that you sort of came in thinking about that you maybe wanted to throw into the mix.
No, I think we've talked before this session, so I kind of know what you're doing, and I really respect that. If I were much younger, I would be building a practice with multiple practitioners. I think that it is the best way to support good work by therapists. I'm not saying that the days of the independent. In fact, I was speaking to somebody about this same thing a few days ago.
Yeah.
The days of the independent therapist are over, but I think that there's a lot that can be done to make them more effective, make them happier, make patients happier. And I think so. I think that what you're doing is the best direction for that. Absolutely, it's kind of building, helping these nascent, however large they are, to grow, to provide more service more efficiently.
I'm curious, just maybe if you could share just a little bit more about that, because I think it is always an important thing to think about if you are entering the field or if you've been in the field for a while. There are these different vehicles, right? You could be an independent practitioner. You could work in a different setting. Why is it that this group practice, what do you think is the power and the possibility in the group practice?
I think, there's a number of things, and if you set it up right. First of all, diversity in skill sets. I may, for example, even constantly, I'm presented with clinical issues that I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with. It would be very good to have somebody that I don't have. It's like, well, who do I refer to?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if I had 6 identical therapists, we all had the same viewpoints and the same trainings, that wouldn't work. But I've had staff members that are trained in EMDR. I've had, if there's a colleague with EMDR and somebody comes to me and I detect, there's a trauma response here that could be dealt with somebody with EMDR. I certainly don't have time, energy, money to go out and be trained as an EMDR therapist.
Right.
But if I have somebody in the office and say, hey, go and work with therapist X for, and then at this end, again, it's ownership of patients is always an interest, ownership in a sense. And you can decide if you want to come back to me or if you want to continue with her. I think a grown-up tries not to own the people that they treat, but so there's that. There's a lot of that. ability that when I have to go out and find somebody with EMDR, I mean, it's like, oh, hey, do you have any openings? It's
a lot of work.
Referral process, right? So just internal referrals is a very nice thing, and there's a certain critical mass that you can have. I think that just all the support services. I mean, a therapist is a therapist. They're not a bookkeeper, biller, insurance specialist. Even scheduling specialist.
Yes.
Some of these things taken off our back is going to lead. I don't want to be sitting here stressed like I don't know my cash flow. I don't know. Especially it's very stressful. And I think everything that you can do to reduce stress on a therapist is good for the patients as well as a therapist.
Awesome insight, Bruce. It was such a pleasure meeting you, having this conversation. I'm very confident the audience will learn from this, and I know I certainly have, so very much appreciated.
Very good. Dan, it's been a pleasure.